Joining us now to talk about what's been quite a week on the political front is USA Today's Washington bureau chief Susan Page, Slate's chief political correspondent and CBS News political analyst Jamelle Bouie, White House correspondent for the Associated Press Julie Pace, and Washington Post columnist Michael Gerson. Susan, I want to start with you. Is Chairman Priebus right that this question of impersonating a spokesperson, it's the first little bump in the general election, but is Chairman Priebus right that this is just going to go by the wayside?
You know, I think the reality that he was impersonating someone else, himself, as producing himself as his own PR person, is not really, 25 years ago, is not important. The fact that he is now denying it, when on the face of it, it just seems to be true, is perhaps an issue not for the people who support him. I think it's been clear through these primaries that people who support him are going to support him no matter what. But in his effort to expand the electorate that supports him in a general election, I think it's probably one of those things that makes people think, who is this man? Can I trust him? Can I trust him to be president and commander-in-chief? Not a big deal, but maybe part of a case that could be made against him by his opponents.
Michael, what do you make of Chairman Priebus essentially saying, boy, the voters really like Donald Trump, and so that's proof that these questions about him, whether it's taxes or any of this other stuff, don't
well,
really
it's
matter.
a one-step away defense. He's not actually defending his views. He's saying what an extraordinary phenomenon this guy is. That's an odd position for the chairman of the RNC to be in. I mean, this is a case where he's deceiving people, I think. And but he has never had a cost to that. So it's encouraged him over time. He gets away with it, and that encourages it.
Jamelle, what do you think of the Clinton campaign has tried to make a lot of the tax returns that Donald Trump has not released. Is that profitable for her, given the fact that she set up her own email server outside the rules? The FBI is looking into whether there was any criminal activity associated with that. Does she really want to have a big, frank conversation about transparency?
Right. I don't think she does. I think the Clinton campaign is approaching Donald Trump so far as if he were a normal and typical nominee from the other side, and I think it's just the wrong approach for the Clinton campaign to take. If some of the rhetoric coming from the Clinton campaign is true, that Trump is something unprecedented, then these avenues of attack are really not helpful, because Trump's argument is that, listen, I'm a sleazy guy. I'm not going to deny that. I'm sleazy. I'm probably a little dishonest. But what you need in the White House is someone who is sleazy and dishonest for you. And so I think Clinton has to find a way to say, listen, he's sleazy and dishonest, but it's never going to be for you. And he is sort of conjuring the worst impulses Americans have for no other reason than his own personal gain. And that's going after him on tax returns and, you know, transparency just doesn't do that. Elizabeth Warren seems to have figured out how to do it, and I think the Clinton campaign needs to sort of huddle with her about making those kinds of attacks.
All right, we're going to pause there. We're going to step away for a commercial, but we'll have a great deal more with our panel covering all the week's news, and stick with us. Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. We're back with Susan Page of USA Today, Jamelle Bouie from Slate, Julie Pace from the Associated Press, and Washington Post Michael Gerson. Julie, I want to start with you. This was the week that Donald Trump met with Paul Ryan. Where do things stand in the Republican Unity Project at the end of this week?
Well, we heard a lot of talk about unity. That was sort of the word of the week. At this point, it seems to be a bit of superficial unity, because beneath the surface, there continue to be huge differences between the Paul Ryan wing of the Republican Party and what now is the Donald Trump wing of the Republican Party. But I think the fact that Trump came to Washington, had this closed-door meeting with Ryan, and got the speaker to come out and speak quite warmly about him was actually an accomplishment. And I think it showed that there is an effort underway on Capitol Hill to have lawmakers unify around Trump. And even a week ago, that was a big open question. I think we now see the direction that this is headed.
Michael, give me your take on this in terms of what the party is going through. Is this a situation where all parties, it's a little messy getting unified? People say some things during the primaries, but then they all come together and row in the same direction. Is that what we have here, or?
Well, I think that Ryan has laid the predicate for eventual surrender on this. I think that's the case. And I think that Trump is benefiting from extreme polarization in America. So a lot of people that thought that they were never Trump are very much never Hillary Clinton in the party. And they're making a short-term appeal on the Supreme Court. That all makes sense. But there's a long-term problem with having Trump as your nominee. I mean, Republicans have problems with immigrants, and he is proposing to get rid of 11 million people. They've got problem with women, and you look at the New York Times front page story, you know, this is a whole second front in the war on women that he represents. And so, you know, I think that there's a short-term calculation, but then huge long-term risks for the Republican Party to confirm some of its worst, most destructive stereotypes. And that could take decades to get beyond.
Which is what you see Paul Ryan struggling with, I think, because in the short term, you can't imagine the Republican Speaker of the House is not going to endorse the Republican candidate for president. I don't think that's a realistic scenario. But you see him struggling with trying to see if maybe he can pull Trump back a little bit, maybe on some of his rhetoric, or do something
but he
moderate
didn't
him
get
in some
anything
way.
in return that I could tell.
Right.
There was
Paul Ryan
there's no
didn't.
trade
And
here.
you know, there's no template for getting anything from Trump, right? Nobody who's opposed Trump in the past has gotten anything from Trump. But Paul Ryan is 46 years old. He's going to be around when Donald Trump is gone. And I think he's trying to figure out, what can I do that protects the Republican Party that I want to represent? Because I don't think Donald Trump is now a wing of the Republican Party. Donald Trump is the face of the Republican Party this year. Donald Trump defines the GOP, at least until November.
So I think not rejecting Donald Trump kind of sets up this future Paul Ryan for kind of the same kind of failure. Because part of the problem, part of the reason Donald Trump could even win in the Republican primary is that the countervailing forces that could have existed, a large share of Latino Republicans or a large share of African American Republicans, just don't exist. You mentioned polarization, Michael. I think there's as much racial polarization in American politics as anything else that's produced Trump. And Trump himself is going to kind of reinforce that racial polarization. You know, after '64, Goldwater essentially helped make African Americans a permanent Democratic voting group. Trump can do the same for Latinos, right? And so 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you could have an entirely new generation of Hispanic voters who are still voting for Democrats because of Trump.
Julie, how long does Paul Ryan have? He says he doesn't want fake unity, but at some point, doesn't he have to get to yes for a variety of reasons? But how long do you think that is?
Well, he says this is going to be a long process. To Michael's point, I think that he will want something. I don't know what that will be, because there is so much difference between these two men in terms of style, in terms of tone, in terms of their vision for the party long term. I think that he clearly sent the message that he's going to get there. And for him personally, the longer this takes, all this means is that every day that Paul Ryan is on Capitol Hill, he's going to be asked, are you there yet? Have you decided to endorse him? And it's going to overshadow what he really believes in strongly, which is a positive, affirmative agenda that Republicans can run on in the fall. So he has to balance that. How much does he want this open question about Trump to overtake what he believes is an agenda that his House members can run on in November?
Michael, you've seen a president up close, what they look like, having worked for one. I was interested in Congressman King saying, well, if Donald Trump changes some positions on North Korea, on some other specific areas, he would feel more confident. Is that really all that this is about, is just getting the right positions on these issues?
I think politicians are used to dealing with splitting differences on issues. They're used to the best of, you know, two bad alternatives. But the question is here whether the Republican candidate for president is fit to be president, whether he has pursued a division and nativism at the center of American politics that could really change our public life in destructive ways, fundamental and destructive ways. And under those circumstances, you're not talking about this issue or that issue. You're talking about fitness. You're talking about, can this man represent America in the world? Can he represent all our citizens in this process? And those are open questions right now, given the way that he has gotten to this point.
Jamelle, what Reince Priebus and others would say is that, well, whatever questions people may have about Donald Trump and his fitness for the office, Hillary Clinton has, and we heard him say it today, has the same kinds of challenges. Is that a pretty good pushback to the point Michael makes?
I don't think it's a good pushback at all. You know, Hillary Clinton has a whole host of problems. She has, you know, aforementioned problems in transparency. She has her tight connections to Wall Street. She has all these things that people on the left or right are justly upset about. But she is fundamentally a mainstream politician. She exists well within the categories of American politics. On policy substance, she's not that far from Barack Obama. Trump is, I use this word intentionally, he's conjuring sort of the worst kind of nativism. He's conjuring bigotry for the sake of trying to win an election. Once you open that box, in any kind of society, but especially American society, where we have these deep-seated racial divisions that have long had implications for our politics. Once you kind of open that box, it doesn't close again. And I think because of that, because Trump is bringing to the fore for the first time in decades, in an explicit way at least, some of the ugliest impulses in American life, I don't think it's just a matter of, oh, well, Hillary Clinton's worse. I mean, sure, she's a liberal and you don't like her, but she's not encouraging violence at political events. Right.
Well, this gets to the whole calculus that Clinton is making in the general election, which is that voters in the end will want a mainstream politician, someone who does have experience in the political arena. Trump is clearly making a different calculation. He won out on that argument in the Republican primary. And I do think that it's risky for her in some degree, because she does have to try to inspire people. She does have to make them feel like she could come to Washington and shake things up, because in both parties, people want that. She just wants them in the end to come to this idea that you might not like her, you may think she has trouble with honesty, transparency, but she is at least fit for office.
But this is exactly the wrong campaign for Hillary Clinton to be running in, right? She may end up winning, but it's an electorate that wants change. She represents continuity. She wants to outline policy positions, everything. Julie and I were talking about this. She's come out with some very interesting policies in the last couple of weeks, including Medicare for More. Absolutely not breaking through, because what breaks through is what Donald Trump says and how she responds to it. And that will be a dilemma for the next 6 months. How do you define a campaign on your own turf when he is driving the conversation?
I want to pick up on that when we come back, but for the moment we'll take a little bit of a break. We'll be back with our panel and much more. And we're back now with more from our panel. Michael, I want to try and get you to help me think about what the turf looks like now that we're in a general election. There were a lot of things that were undone by Donald Trump, masterfully really, in the primaries in terms of just changing the playbook, as Reince Priebus called it, of politics. So how much is the playbook totally new now in the general election, or are there some standards that still apply?
Well, he's making an unusual message to the American people. He's pretty random on his policy views. It's very hard to determine them. It's kind of like quantum physics. They change all the time, okay?
Schrodinger's Trump.
He's offering himself to be in charge of everything, essentially. It's very much a personal appeal he's making. The side effect of that, by the way, is that we're very likely to get a negative election here. You're going to have two personalities against one another, not necessarily two visions. I think, given Trump's penchant for attacking back with even greater intensity, this could be a very negative election based on personality rather than, on policy views, which he changes all the time.
That's right. And Julie, it feels like we're going to have, it's not only based on personality, but both parties feel like they're having an arranged marriage here, where we talked about the unity in the Republican Party that's a little difficult getting that put together. But in the Democratic Party, when that contest is over, there's also going to be this kind of arranged marriage.
And it's being put off longer and longer as Bernie Sanders continues to win in several states. He will probably have more victories coming up. You do see Hillary Clinton trying to reach out to Sanders voters. I think what her campaign and what Democrats broadly believe is that having Trump as the Republican nominee will be more of a motivating factor for these Sanders supporters than anything else. But at a certain point, she does have to be able to turn her attention toward the general, toward uniting her party. And the longer that Sanders keeps winning, the harder that becomes for her.
It's very hard to say, why won't you get out of the race? You keep winning.
Right?
Yeah. Right.
She didn't like when people made that argument against her in 2008, certainly.
And I think when you look at the West Virginia primary, which of course Sanders won, the scariest number for the Clinton people were 38% of Sanders voters said they would vote for Trump. Now, West Virginia has some peculiar politics, but that shows the kind of appeal of the anti-establishment candidate that both Sanders and Trump have been.
What if that's right, Jamelle? What if it's just, we're so fed up with Washington that, and Reince Priebus used the word earthquake, that they want the earthquake. And forget positions, schmissions. We want the earthquake, and that's Donald Trump.
I think that might be true in the Republican Party. I'm just not sure how true it is in the Democratic Party. You ask Sanders voters, separate and apart from the West Virginia primary, you ask them, what do you think of President Obama? Huge approval. You ask them, what do you think of Hillary Clinton? Pretty good approval. You ask them, do you want, what kind of policy would you like to see continued? And it's usually kind of an Obama-style mix. So I think much as was true in 2008, the heat of a primary has sort of created the perception in the Democratic Party that there are these steep divisions. And no doubt, I think there are generational divisions in the Democratic Party that Sanders has revealed and may play themselves out in various ways going forward. But in terms of the presidential race, I tend to think that there really isn't that much disunity in the Democratic Party, and that if Sanders decides to campaign vociferously for the Democratic Party, which he continuously says, him and his surrogates, that they will do everything they can to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. I don't think this will be such a problem, and I don't think, given that the Democratic Party is almost like it's close to majority non-white, I just do not think that Trump is the earthquake that anyone in the Democratic Party is looking for.
Michael, let me ask you about the Trump cabinet, which is, in talking to some Republicans, they've said, well, if he puts Chris Christie in here and Ben Carson in there and maybe brings in Giuliani, they take comfort in the people he might surround himself with. Is that a good way for him to make the case to a larger group of Republicans? Hey, give them stability.
I think the way to make the case to a larger group of Republicans is to look like you might win. I think that's what persuades a lot of people that are interested in power in Washington, and then all of a sudden they find ways to accommodate in these circumstances. I think, though, that the foreign policy establishment of the Republican Party is probably the least attached to the Republican Party. They've been the most critical of his views, say, on tariffs with China and our ties with our allies, just basic things, which you saw some in the Gates interview as well. These are radical, dangerous foreign policy positions that he's undertaken. I think the foreign policy establishment has a lot to swallow in order to participate in a Trump administration.
Robert Gates, pretty good Republican, right? Who do you think he's going to vote for? From listening to that interview, he didn't answer that question, but it sure sounded like he was more comfortable with Hillary Clinton than with Donald Trump.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to our panel. We'll be back in a moment with that interview with Secretary Gates. Stay with us.